Welcome. I am Sally Goad, and I'm with the Knoxville Bar Association's History Project, and we're happy to bring you a conversation today with Amy Morris Hess, Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Law at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I would just like to note that I'm one of many KBA members interested in trust and estates law who's benefited from Professor Hess's teaching and mentoring over the last few years. And Amy, would you restate your name for us in full and tell us something about your early background?
Thank you very much for doing this for me, Sally. I'm very happy to be here with you today. You asked about my early life, I believe. Well, I've got a lot of life. I was born 74 years ago in New York City, in Manhattan, as a matter of fact. My parents were living on Riverside Drive, overlooking the river when I was born, which becomes important later. They moved out into the outer reaches of northeastern Queens, which is where I was raised. I went to public schools. And when I say I was raised in New York City, people think of high-rise apartment buildings. I actually lived in a house that had a lawn, and I had to shovel the snow because I was the oldest child. And so I had a suburban life. And went to a public high school and graduated and went on to college. And I applied to a number of different colleges, but I guess Riverside Drive must have beckoned me, because I decided to go to Barnard College, which is the women's part of Columbia University, and it is up right near where I was born. Once I'd done that, which was thrilling, I loved living in New York City during the time that I was an undergraduate. I probably loved it more than I needed to. But once I graduated, I went to law school at the University of Virginia because I decided that it was time to get out of the Northeast. So when I was applying to law schools, I didn't apply to Columbia or to Yale or Harvard or any of the other schools that are in that part of the world. I applied to some really good schools, including UVA and the University of Chicago and Duke, and was accepted at all the ones I applied to. I don't know what kind of mistakes they had on their admissions committee, but I was accepted. And decided that UVA sounded like the right place to go, and it turned out it was. I had a wonderful time there.
Are you from a family of lawyers, or can you tell us something about your parents and
No,
their background?
I'm from, my father would have been, I think he would have been a college professor if he could have. He has a master's degree in pure math, but then he looked at his master's degree in pure math and decided he needed to earn a living, so he went back and got another master's degree in accountancy and was a CPA. He was a tax person. He worked for the Internal Revenue Service for most of his career. So I guess that might have some bearing on why I was interested in tax. My mother's career path was completely different. She went to Juilliard, majored in voice, and was a singer. And I do sing in church choirs and so forth, but I don't have anywhere near the talent that she had. She had her own radio program at one time in the 1940s. She was kind of an interesting person. I went to undergraduate school thinking that I was going to be a cultural anthropologist. Margaret Mead is a Barnard alumna, so of course I was going to the right place. And I guess I took a page out of my father's book and decided there were easier ways to earn a living than either pure math or cultural anthropology. So I went to law school. The chair of the political science department at Barnard was a lawyer, and she had been in public service in government during President Roosevelt's administration. So I decided that might be a nice thing to do. I like solving problems, I like helping people, and off I went to study law.
How did you begin your practice?
During the time that I was in law school, I married a law school classmate, and our long-term goal was to have our own law firm. But we decided we needed to get an education after we had our education. So when we had our JD degrees in hand, we went and practiced with large law firms in New York City to refine our trade. I was with Kelly, Dry and Warren, and I was there for almost 4 years. And then we decided that we had kind of had all the fun we could stand with the rat race, and it was time to start Hess and Hess, which we did in Charlottesville, Virginia, where we had gone to law school. We did that for about 5 years. During that 5 years, we added an unrelated partner, so it became Carwile and Hess. And the standing joke in the family was that I was the Hess on the door on the even-numbered days, and my husband was the Hess on the door on the odd-numbered days. And so everybody was accounted for. And we did that for about 5 years. And I think both of us were a little disappointed in the sophistication of the practice. I don't think we'd ever really thought about how practice in a small city in central Virginia might be different from practice in a larger city. And what was happening then in Charlottesville, and then is the late 1970s, was that people who had really exciting tax problems and really exciting estate planning problems were either going to Richmond or Washington, D.C. to find a lawyer. So we were certainly making a very nice living, but the work just wasn't all that challenging. And I decided that I would try teaching, and got a job as a visiting assistant professor at the University of Tennessee College of Law. Actually, its visiting positions are only a year, so I went to another law school for a year. And in the fall of my second year of teaching, someone from UT called me and said, "Would you come back and stay with us permanently?" And I really didn't like where I had landed, and I really liked the University of Tennessee and Knoxville. So I came back, and here I am. I've been here since, the visiting professorship was 1979-80, and then I was away for a year. And in August of 1981, I started on the full-time faculty here.
Certainly a boon to Tennessee. What was it like here in 1981 at the University of Tennessee College of Law?
Very different in one funny way. The room we're sitting in has been my office since a big renovation in 1997. But in 1981, when I came here, this was a little garret office. It only had about half the square footage that it has now, but it did have the two dormer windows that you can see to my left in the wall. And it was the room they gave to the low person on the totem pole. It was up in a corner. I think the faculty lounge was next door, and there were stacks from the library and so forth. When they renovated it, it became this, which is wonderful. It's very spacious and airy, and the windows seem bigger, even though I think they're actually the same windows. So when I saw it on the chart, I said, "Oh well, that'll make memories for me." So I'm going to go back and stay there now that it's renovated. And it has always, in the intervening maybe 15 years, when I got a little more senior, but before 1997, I had another office, and it's in a building that's no longer part of the law school. So.
Well, and I've spoken to a couple of your peers at the law school, and I know Professor John Sobieski was he the interim dean? Is that right, when you came? And no, I said that wrong.
Wasn't the interim in 1981? I believe he was on the appointments committee that suggested that the rest of the faculty hire me originally, and he kind of became my mentor when I got here, because of course I was an experienced trust and estates lawyer. I'd been doing it for 9 years, but I didn't know anything about teaching, and you kind of have to come in on the ground floor and figure out what you're doing on the fly. Law professors don't take courses in education, so you kind of walk in and say, "Gee, what's a lesson plan, and how do I teach this?" And John was very helpful in helping me figure all that out.
Well, one of the things that many people have said to me when I've mentioned that I'm interviewing you is that you're just wonderful at meeting students where they are and helping them to understand complex concepts. How did that come about, do you think, when you weren't a teacher in the beginning?
It's probably partly instinctive. I don't know which of my ancestors I have to thank for that instinct, but I would look at material and say, what did I need to know about this before I learned it? And I would sit down and write a lesson plan out that would help people learn that. I also had to learn, and again, I just had an instinct about this, teaching at a state university. Of course, I went to a state university law school because I went to Virginia, but I never thought about it as a student there. Teaching in a state university law school is like teaching in a one-room schoolhouse out on the prairie in the 18th century, because you have students in the class who already have advanced degrees in accounting, and students who majored in art history and hate the word mathematics, and they're all trying to learn basic income tax in the same room at the same time. And somehow you have to figure out what I call the level of the water. You have to figure out where everybody is so you can bring the ones that are scared and not very familiar with the concepts up to the level they need to be without boring the folks who already know something. You want to challenge them at the same time. but you don't want to lose the folks that need a little extra help.
That it also sounds like a good thing to remember when you're speaking before a court, that they may need to know what you're trying to explain also.
It's interesting. I do some expert witness work, and so far it's just happened that I've never done a jury trial. I think the main reason for that is that in a lot of states, trust in estates is considered an equity matter, so it's heard by chancery, and very often chancellors don't have juries. So you're right. The jury would be exactly my basic income tax class if I was trying to teach them trust in estates concepts.
When you spoke about being mentored by Professor Sobieski, I know that you've also been a mentor to many people. Professor Joan Hemingway spoke to me about how you had mentored her through the tenure process, and Professor Don Leatherman said that you were here when he came, and your mentorship helped him a great deal. What did you learn about the whole tenure process that has helped those you've worked with later, do you think?
The tenure process is rather barbaric for a bunch of civilized people. University professors really haven't found a civilized way to promote folks whom they want to stay for a long time. I described my own tenure process to someone as asking 30 of my friends to lock themselves in a room and decide whether to fire me or not, which is basically what they're doing. Luckily, they didn't decide to fire me, and I'm still here. But having had that experience, I thought that paying it forward might help other people. Around the time, I think it was around the time that Don was a tenure leading professor, I was chair of the committee on faculty development, and we were asked or told, I don't know which verb to use, by the university to revise our tenure standards. So I and Professor Joseph Cook and a third professor who's not here anymore revised the standards, and I got an organic sense of what they were supposed to do and how they worked. So when Don asked me to read his papers and give him feedback and so forth, I was kind of working firsthand from the standards that had just been accepted by the faculty. But I think that kind of nurturing people who come after you is another aspect of teaching. I think it's an important part of the profession.
And Professor Hemingway mentioned that you talked to her husband when she was going through the process. Is that something that you learned was a good idea to let the family know?
Well, that started with Professor Lloyd. Deanna Lloyd was a certified public accountant. She's since gone on and changed careers. But since she was a CPA and I was a tax lawyer, she and I knew each other anyway. And so I had some sort of warning telephone calls with her, this is what's going to happen. And no, Bob hasn't gone crazy. He's just a little bit nervous at the moment. Don't worry about it. And it worked. So when Don came up for tenure, I decided I'd talk to Dana Leatherman, who is also a tax lawyer. Seems to run in the family here. And I think she was very grateful for it. And then Merritt Hemingway doesn't do anything that has to do with law. He's a techie, basically. But I thought it might help to know something about the tenure process and what Joan was going through, and apparently he appreciated it as well, because 20 years later she's still mentioning it.
She is, and so is Don. They definitely feel that it was a help and then I think just the awareness that you knew that it was going to affect the family also was important to them. Here at the University of Tennessee College of Law, one of the really star aspects here is the Wills Clinic and the whole clinic program. How did the Wills Clinic come to be here?
When I came to the University of Tennessee, everybody was very, very proud of their clinical program, and they definitely should be. It's been in existence since 1947, and it's an excellent program. But I looked around and I said, where are the clinical experiences for the students who are going to do transactional law? And everybody looked at me like I was talking a foreign language, and they said, oh, gee, we're teaching litigators. We're not teaching office lawyers, aren't we? And I said, yeah, that's right, you are. You're only teaching litigators, which is important, but there's an aspect that's missing. At the time, there was a clinical professor named Susan Kovac, who has long since left the law school. And she and I devised what we thought would be a good clinic for students doing trust and estates law. She went on to become general counsel to the Department of Children's Services eventually, and left the law school before we could realize our plan. But then, maybe 15 or 20 years later, we started the Center for Entrepreneurial Law and had the opportunity to start a general business clinic. And there were a couple of wills cases that the students in the business clinic ended up getting, usually as referrals from some business entity that they were helping. And the professor there asked me if I would supervise them, so I did. And I thought, gee, we were supposed to have a wills clinic 20 years ago, and we don't have one. It just happened that about the time all of this was going on, I went to a meeting of the American College of Trust and Estates Council, which is a national organization of estate planners, and had breakfast with a friend of mine who's an attorney in Chicago, Scott McHugh, who happened to be chair of the grants committee of the American College of Trust and Estates Council Foundation, which is their charitable arm. And he started a very interesting conversation. He said, we just created a wills clinic at Harvard Law School. There's a long backstory, which we won't go into right now, about why they chose Harvard as their first place. But he said, and it was really successful. We're out in Jamaica Plain, and we're helping folks who can't afford the lawyers downtown in Boston. But what we really should do is start a wills clinic at a public university. And I said, Scott, you came to the right place. The University of Tennessee has had an excellent clinic for, it was then 60 years. And I would be happy to take a proposal back and send you a grant proposal for a wills clinic at the University of Tennessee. By 2008, we had the money, and we now have a wills clinic at the University of Tennessee. So that's how that started.
I have spoken to Marshall Peterson, and I know when he was a student here, he said that you were a mentor of his, and there was not a wills clinic then, but that in his practice, that they have found that the graduates of the wills clinic then become excellent associates for them when they're ready to bring someone in, or interns and then associates. So that continuation of someone that you mentored in a long time ago before there was a wills clinic is now finding the benefit of taking on those people. And one of those was Catherine Waddell, who I spoke to, who was a 2018 graduate, and she said that you helped her to kind of find her place, what she wanted to do with the trust company. How do you view that kind of conduit of your wills clinic students becoming practitioners in the community, and those who hire new people?
If Marshall is satisfied with the wills clinic students, then obviously we've done our job, because we're supposed to be preparing them for practice in sophisticated trust and estates venues like Marshall's is. And Catherine was a very interesting case, because when you do very well in law school, everybody assumes, if you're going to be a transactional lawyer, that you're going to go with a big firm and do high-powered work, because you can, and that's kind of considered the pinnacle of private practice. Catherine came to see me one day and said, I've interviewed with these big firms in Atlanta and even in Knoxville, and that's not for me. That's not what I want. And I started enumerating the alternative practices, and we got to, how would you like to work in a bank as a trust officer, or in the bank's legal department advising sophisticated estate planning clients? And she said, that's it, I want to try that. So that's where she is. She's with the trust company, and it's a perfect match. I don't believe that. I was a big law firm lawyer myself the first 5 years that I practiced, but I don't believe that's for everyone. And I think part of being a good mentor and a good teacher is figuring out the right hole for the right peg, to use the old expression. And at this point, Catherine is definitely a round peg in a round hole at the trust company. So
she said that was just an absolutely perfect fit, and that you helped her go there. And I think you've done that for so many people. You mentioned also the College of Trust and Estates Council. I believe you're an academic fellow. Is that correct?
Yes.
There, what does that mean?
The American College of Trust and Estates Council is a rather exclusive group. You must have practiced or taught for at least 10 years, predominantly in the area of trust and estates and related fields. And you must be nominated by someone, and then you must go through a vetting process. And they do turn people down. So I guess I must have passed all the right tests because, yes, I've been an academic fellow since 2005.
And I believe since even before that, since 1995, there a certain Bogart has been important in your life. What is that?
Well, actually, if they want to turn the camera around, the volumes of Bogart are on the first shelf immediately behind you. Bogart is one of the two national treatises, basically encyclopedias, of the law of trusts. It was started in the 1920s by George Bogart, who was a professor at the University of Chicago Law School, and continued by his son, who worked for a large law firm in Chicago. In fact, it was the same law firm that Scott McHugh happened to work for, and they were good friends. In 1994, George Bogart the Younger decided to go of counsel with his firm and to stop doing the treatise because he was ready to retire. So West, which publishes Bogart, looked around for somebody to take it over. And at the time, I was working on a Trust and Estates casebook for the basic course in Trust and Estates with Owen Schaefer, who was the main editor of all the Trust and Estates books for West. So Owen asked my co-author and I if we would take over Bogart. And my first reaction on the phone was, is this a phony phone call? Are you kidding? You want me to take over Bogart? Well, he wasn't kidding. And we did take it over. And then my co-author, for reasons of her own, decided not to do it. So I was left with updating all 18 volumes of an 18-volume treatise on the law of trust. In 1994, which is when all this started, that wasn't all that big a deal. But in the early 2000s, I don't know if you remember this, but all of the uniform laws started blossoming. We got the Uniform Trust Code and the Uniform Powers of Attorney Act and all of those laws. So now the trust and estates practice is very statute-oriented instead of being case law-oriented, and it's moving faster than I can keep up with it. It's a big job. It is the job I retained even after I stopped teaching, but frankly, I could probably work full-time doing Bogart. I don't, but it probably could be a full-time job.
When I spoke to Joan Hemingway, she said that her husband had a business with, there was a trustee managing a trust that she needed to speak to in Ohio, and when he found out that she was at the University of Tennessee, he said, "You are so lucky. You have Amy Morris Hess." And she's the voice of trust and estates. So, do you think that's because of the Bogart book? Or I know you have some other national profile organizations that you've been involved in also.
Actually, I don't know. I know that when I've been asked to be an expert witness in a number of cases that are outside the state of Tennessee. I haven't done one in Ohio, but I've done numbers of them all the way to the West Coast and a lot in the Midwest. And most of the time when a lawyer calls me, he or she tells me that that's why. It's because I'm the author of Bogart.
Interesting. I going to the personal side for a moment, I know I asked you one day what you were most proud of, and one of them was, I believe, your son Carlos. Can you tell us a little about him?
Sure. During the time that I decided to go on into teaching, my former husband decided to get out of law, actually, and I think the strain of new career, new state, new everything was a little bit too much for our marriage, so we divorced. And when I got to Tennessee, I was divorced when I got to teaching here. And then I looked around after I figured out what teaching was all about, and I had a little time to think about my life and thought, well, I may or may not ever remarry, I don't know, but I certainly would like to be a parent. So I looked into single-parent adoptions. I've always said that if I ever wrote my own autobiography, the name of it would be Where Angels Fear to Tread, because think about this. I'm a single parent. I'm not yet tenured on the University of Tennessee faculty. And I willingly go halfway around the world to Sao Paulo, Brazil, to pick up a 6-year-old orphan who doesn't speak any English and is biracial. And I bring him back to Tennessee and raise him. we can laugh about it now because it was a success, I guess. He is now 42 years old. He has his own videography business in town, and a committed partner and 2 stepchildren, one of whom is a freshman at the University of Tennessee, his stepson. So it worked.
Yes. What was it like in those years being a professor and a single mother at the same time, juggling everything that you had to juggle?
You have to pay close attention to your to-do list. There are 2 chapters of the Trust and Estates case book that I wrote, and I know which 2 they are because it's so vivid in my memory. When my son was in middle school, he decided he wanted to be on a football team. Now, he played soccer, of course, as a child, because all Brazilians do. But when he got to middle school, he said, no, I want to try American football. So, okay, we're going to try American football. And he tried at a team that played way out west. I live near west. I live in Bearden. And this was way out Cedar Bluff. So I would pick him up at Bearden Middle School 4 afternoons a week and drive him to Cedar Bluff and drop him off at the football field and go to the library in Concord with my laptop computer and write for a couple of hours on the textbook, and then go back and pick him up and take him home and feed him dinner and help him with his homework and hope that he'd go to bed early enough that I wouldn't fall asleep before he did. And that was our life when he was in 8th grade.
Did you find that being a professor gave you flexibility? Or I know for myself, I've sometimes thought flexibility is great, but you still can't do 36 hours work in 24 hours. So
Exactly. There you go. You got to find the right 36 hours. It's the flexibility part is wonderful when you have a child, because I don't have to do my lesson plans at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. I can do them at 8 p.m. on Wednesday evening, as long as they're done by the next time I have to teach a class. So it's very flexible. And of course, I was working in the library while he was at a football game. You can't interview a client that way, but you can certainly do work that's just yours that way. So I found being a professor helpful. It doesn't change the fact that being a single parent and being a university professor adds up to about 2.5 full-time jobs.
Yes, yeah.
So.
And Professor Sobieski told me that he wanted to hear also, or wanted people to know about your cats, which are another responsibility you have that I know you enjoy. Can you tell us anything about your cats? And I understand that there's a wonderful little patio for them. Is that right, at your house?
Yes, there is. About the same time as the football escapade, my son thought he might want to become a veterinarian when he grew up. He loves animals too. So he essentially apprenticed himself to the veterinarian who was at that time taking care of the 2 cats that I had at that time. And he became a sort of student assistant. You know, he washed cages and occasionally washed dogs and fed them and did that sort of thing. And then he decided he might like to have a few more than just 2 cats. So we had several at one time, I don't remember. But we had a neighbor who didn't like cats. And we'd been told that he was capturing neighborhood cats whose families he knew, but he was capturing them anyway, and taking them to the Humane Society and saying they were strays. Well, we didn't want to spend our lives ransoming our cats from the humane officer. So Carlos went through a bunch of pet magazines and found a cat porch that he liked and drew a picture of how he wanted it modified and gave it to a husband and wife team, friends of ours who go to church with us, who are both general contractors.
Oh.
And the general contractors built the cat porch off our family room, and then also built, it's like I don't know how to describe it, it's like a corridor. It goes from a cat door that's in a window out into the porch. The porch is completely encased in chain link fencing, even on the top, so the cats can't get out, and they can get from the house through this corridor into the cat porch. And they can go out and watch the squirrels and, watch the birds, but they can't do any harm to the squirrels or the birds. And perhaps more importantly, they're outside without being in my nasty neighbor's backyard. So they got outdoors time, and they still use it. My cats now I have 3, and they are elderly. The oldest one will be 16 in 2 weeks. Oh. But they still use the cat porch. They like it out there.
Oh, I understand that it was quite the highlight of a few little faculty get-togethers, that those would sometimes rotate from professor's house to professor's house, and that your
Yes,
caddy
well, John
was
wanted to have a number of animals as well. And when it's the Christmas party, and when it was at my house, they were fascinated by this appendage at the end of my family room that was for the cats.
That's wonderful. And I understand there was something about a Brazilian dinner that you and Carlos used to fix and donate. Is that
we
something
did that.
You still do,
We've done that
or?
for several charities, including the Alan Novak auction at the law school. We've done it 3 or 4 times for the Alan Novak auction. He loves to cook, and so what he did was he auctioned off the national dish of Brazil, which is called Feijoada Completa. It's a rice and beans dish that has about 5 different kinds of meat in it that is slow cooked with the black beans, and it's served like a smorgasbord almost. You put all the plates out and people go around and take something from each plate. There are oranges and collard greens and really spicy onions and pork and beef tenderloin and all kinds of stuff, and you just put all these plates out and let everybody have what they want. And it's supposed to be served with beer. We can't get Brazilian beer in Knoxville, so we usually use Mexican beer, which is pretty close. And then the dessert is what is called in Portuguese sweet rice. It's like a rice pudding, but it doesn't have any raisins in it. So it's just rice and milk and sugar, basically.
That sounds marvelous. I did want to be sure and mention, too, you've had a few awards to your credit, and we won't try to go through them all. But recently, in 2018, the Hall of Fame of the National Association of Estate Planners and Council, am I saying that right? And how does that come about?
For about 30 years, I have been very active in the American Bar Association Real Property Trust and Estates Law section. And a good friend of mine who happened, this is completely serendipitous, we met at an ABA meeting, but she is also a graduate of Barnard. She didn't go the same time I did. She's younger than I am. She's a trust officer with Bessemer Trust in Florida. And one day she said, the National Association of Estate Planners and Councils gives this award, and I really want to nominate you for it. Let me send you a description of it, and tell me if you're willing to send me a CV and be nominated. So she did, and apparently they decided that I should get the award. Only one academic gets the award every year. I think there are 4 or 5 awards given, and they're all given in categories. There are a couple of practitioners. There's an academic. There are other people besides lawyers. I think the year that I won it, somebody who did financial planning, I'm fairly sure, was one of the other awardees. So I'm now a member of the Hall of Fame of the National Association of Estate Planners and Councils.
Very impressive. And also the Treat Award for Excellence. Would you tell us a little bit about that? The National College of Probate Judges, that 2005?
Oh, yes. That's an interesting coincidence. The chair of the Real Property Trust and Estates Law section nominated me for that award. I didn't even know that the National College of Probate Judges gave an award. He nominated me for the award, and it just happened that the same year the dean of the law school did the same thing. So they got 2 nominations for me the year that I was given the award.
Oh, wow.
And I got the award. It was funny. The award was presented at a meeting of the National College of Probate Judges in San Francisco. And the then president of the American College of Trust and Estates Council was an invited guest at the meeting. She happens to be the spouse of Scott McHugh, the grants committee gentleman that I told you about. Her name is Judy McHugh. And she came up to me and said about 3 words of congratulations, and then said, "But wait a minute, there's an important omission here. Why aren't you a member of ACTEC?" And actually it happened that my nomination was going through the pipeline at the time she said it, so I could say, well, I will be by next year, or I hope I will be by next year, and I was. So.
That national presence, are you finding that you're still keeping as much of a national voice in terms of trusts and estates? Are you staying as active?
The trust and estates, the people who do only trust and estates, is a very small community, even nationally. So I like to go to the meetings of ACTEC and the ABA to keep up with the other people who are doing interesting things in my field. I did, in the very late 1990s, I spent 4 years as the editor-in-chief of the journal that's published by the Real Property Trust and Estates Law section. And I was more recently the chair of their Standing Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. I think I ended that in 2018 or something like that. It's fairly recent.
More locally with the Wills Clinic and that, how often do you end up going into the community to talk to people in the Knoxville area about the Wills Clinic and their legal needs?
The thing about trust and estates clients is they don't have a court date that's pushing them to get something done. So in order to let people know about us, we have to go out into the community. What I do seminars for lay people who are usually consumers of a community organization's activities that would indicate they probably qualify for free legal assistance. So for example, every year we do several seminars for the Knox County Habitat for Humanity homeowners, and we tell them about why they need a will and why they need a power of attorney, and then the students will do work for anybody who wants it, and anybody who doesn't can just go home. We do similar seminars for the Grandparents as Parents organization that's affiliated with the Knox County Community Action Council. And we do some for some hospice groups, some for some church groups. But that's basically the way that the Wills Clinic gets its clients. But of course it serves a dual purpose. It gets us clients, but it also gets the university out into the public eye, and it provides public information to people who might not otherwise know that they really do need a will.
I think it was Catherine Waddell who mentioned to me she had gone with you on some of those trips, and she said that it never feels like here's this highfalutin lawyer, talking down to people who don't know much about what to think about when they're preparing a will and that kind of thing, that it always feels like you meet them on their level. Is that some of the same leveling of the waters that you talked about with students when you go out to community groups?
To me, it's pragmatic. They're not going to listen to me if they think I'm better than they are. And I'm not, so there's no reason for me to think I'm better than they are. So I might as well get the job done efficiently, and the way to get it done efficiently is to strike a rapport, to figure out what they want to know and how they want to know it, and give them the information in a way that they can digest it.
The other thing that I've heard about your communication style, and I know somewhat firsthand also, is that, let's see, one person I talked to said she's left-brained and right-brained at the same time. So she's brilliant and goes right to the heart of the information, but also is really paying attention to the person. And I think it was Don Leatherman said that when he was first showing you his papers, when he was beginning as a professor, that you were both blunt and you were both honest and kind. That you could go right to the heart of it, but you were kind at the same time. So I wanted to pass those compliments on to you, but also to maybe have you think a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about how that affective attention to people combines with the knowledge that you obviously have, the extensive legal knowledge.
I guess I like to succeed, so I don't want to do something that's not going to work. And tearing somebody down is not the best way to build them up. I mean, I realize that the Marine Corps would disagree with me on what I just said, but that may be why I'm not a career military person. I don't know. You want someone to feel that they've got something to offer, that they could do even better than they're doing, but what they're doing is quite good also. And if you tell them that they're awful, they're liable to get discouraged and give up. But if you tell them, you've gotten this far, now if we can just bring you up to here, you'll be really good at this, or you'll be really successful, then you've achieved something. That person will actually do better after you've given them criticism than he was doing before.
And as you look at the students who go out into the community, and you've helped them as their students, and then what a couple of people have said things to me like, she doesn't lose track of people, or let me see if I can find the other. She sustains relationships, was what one person said to me. How do you do that? How do you keep from losing track of people? It's very difficult, I know, for many of us to hang on to those relationships.
Some of it kind of falls in my lap accidentally. Just recently, a former student of mine, I realize I've been teaching too long because of what happened with this former student. A former student of mine who has been practicing trust and estates law for so long that she's now retired asked me if I would bring the Wills Clinic students to her church to do a presentation. And I did, and it was very good. But if I'm going to help fledgling trust and estates lawyers find a good place to practice, as I did with Catherine Waddell, I've got to keep up with the more experienced ones. And the more experienced ones tend to be people I taught 25 years ago. So there's an incentive for me to know where they are.
Sure.
But also I'm asking them to take time out of a very busy day in a very high-powered practice and talk to a third-year law student who may not really know exactly what he or she wants to do, and they're kind of floundering. So I feel as if I owe them a favor in exchange for the favor they're doing for me. So we keep up with each other, and we go out to lunch, or we have a glass of wine after a hard day or something. And that way I'm fairly sure that the next time I have a trust and estates lawyer who wants to practice the kind of law that Marshall Peterson practices, he will find time to talk to that person.
And you seem to always find time to talk to the people who contact you, which is not easy, I know. Did you? I think you told me you had a method for making sure that you answered your email. Is that right? I sent you a question once when I was working on a dicta article, and you were so kind to get back to me right away. And how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're getting back to everyone?
Triage. The first thing I do every morning is I open up my email, and without reading about 2/3 of it, I delete the ones I know I'm not going to answer. And that gives me a field of what needs to be done.
Sure.
And then I look for the ones that need to be answered immediately and the ones that I can put off. And I answer the ones I need to answer immediately. And then the ones that I can put off go in a file so I don't lose them. And I think the dicta article probably was in that second. I have to answer this, but I don't have to answer it by 10 o'clock
It's going
today.
to take me a few minutes to read it, to review it. Yes, yeah.
This is funny. I have a friend who's a retired English professor. He and his wife and I met on an elder hostel trip about 15 years ago and decided we liked each other's company. So we go on elder hostel trips regularly. But he mentioned that, as he put it, he said he was easily distracted. If he got an email like the one you sent me about the dicta, he would answer that now and then realize 3 hours from now that it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and he hasn't done anything else today. So I told him my secret about the triage, and I think that's working much better.
It must be, because everyone is impressed with how you get back to them that I've spoken to. As you mentioned that you're not teaching now, and what does the beginning of retirement look like? I know you're not completely retired at this point, but
I'm doing everything I want to do and nothing I don't, and that's wonderful. I liked teaching very much. What I didn't like about teaching, and the reason I ultimately decided to stop, is I just don't want to be tied down to have to be in room 132 at exactly 11 o'clock on Wednesday every week to teach income tax. I just don't want to do that anymore. And I also want to get away from the ubiquitous administrative work, committee work, reading people's tenure files. So I retired from full-time teaching. When you retire from full-time teaching, you basically surrender your status as a tenured faculty member. So you don't have any administrative responsibility. You're not allowed to have any administrative responsibility. That was wonderful. I like that a lot.
You had to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Can't do that. And then I taught part-time for a little while longer, but then in 2020 I stopped teaching completely. And I'm now doing all the things I've always liked best, which is writing and consulting on difficult cases with trust and estates lawyers across the country. I probably work about the equivalent of half-time, maybe a little bit more than half-time, at law-related stuff. And then I just do what I want. And it's wonderful because every once in a while I wake up on Thursday morning and I say, I don't have any appointments today. I'm going to sit down and read a novel. And that's exactly what I do.
I think you just made several people envious when you said that. That sounds wonderful. And you have some other things you hobbies you enjoy also, as I understand. You said that you sing in choirs.
I do.
And that you walk quite a bit, as I recall.
I'm not singing in a choir right now, although that's it's just that I'm not because I'm doing a lot of other things, I guess. I do walk. I walk mostly for exercise. My father had several chronic heart-related conditions, and I'm figuring if I walk 3 or 4 miles several mornings a week, I might stave it off a little bit. I know it's genetic, and I'm going to get it eventually, but maybe a little. And I love to walk. I love to hike. Interestingly, my most frequent hiking buddy is somebody I met in a church choir because she was the music director of the church, and one day we happened to be talking about what else we did besides sing anthems, and she said she liked to hike, so we go hiking all the time. Now we're both retired, and we hike all the time.
And I understand you travel some. You said that you were traveling with the. Tell me again what the group was.
Oh, the official name of the group now is Road Scholar. It used to be called Elder Hostel. That's the same organization. Yes, we just went on a trip. We spent a week learning the cultural history of San Antonio, Texas, at the beginning of March. We've done several cultural city tours, including Quebec in Canada and Philadelphia. And this most recently we did San Antonio. I'm going on 2 more trips with Elder Hostel in the fall, one of which is about a 2.5-week trip during leaf season in northern New England and the Canadian Maritime provinces. Ooh. And I think it's going to be wonderful.
That sounds marvelous. What have I not asked you that you would like to tell us?
I don't know. I think we've covered just about everything. I really can't think of anything that I haven't said.
Well, this will be my final question to you. I believe that you have a philosophy of life, kind of a rule for yourself that you like to follow, and I'm going to let you state it correctly. I'm going to say my little paraphrase of it, but that you want to leave the world a little bit better than you found it, and that you try to do what you can to further that goal. And I've mentioned that to the people I've spoken to about you in preparation for this interview, and they all said, "Oh yes, that's Amy. That's what she does." Can you tell us a little bit about that philosophy and how you've tried to further it?
Well, I'm probably as obvious from the way I talk. I'm an optimist. I don't expect things to go wrong. I expect things to get better. And I think that every human being has an obligation to do their little part to actually make it better in their corner of the world. You don't have to win the Nobel Prize or find a cure for cancer, but you just have to make the part of the world that you live in a little better when your life is over than it was when your life began. And I've been very blessed so far. I've had a very long life already, and I will tell you that my mother, the musician, lived to be 97, and could still sing in several foreign languages when she was in her 90s. So I'm planning on making the world better for a long time to come.
Oh, well, the world is the better for it. Thank you so much, Amy Morris Hess. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we're so glad that you were able to do this for the History Project.
Thank you, Sally. It's been a lot of fun.